The US and these other countries in Europe, they're cracking under the pressure of fiat money madness. Fiat money breeds violence. Fiat money breeds war. Bitcoin monetizes peace and love. Again, it's a magic mirror. Silicon Valley, Andreessen Horowitz, those guys are not Bitcoiners. They're not Bitcoin maximalists. They're scammers. They're charlatans. And they looked at Bitcoin and they said, we can create something similar to Bitcoin and sell it to suckers and make a quick buck. And now their karmic wheel is crushing them, as it should be. And if they get destroyed and the banks go under and there's a huge crash and the economy blows up, so be it. Well, we had speculated for years about which country would make Bitcoin legal tender first. El Salvador's name didn't pop up. Some people, it is just anathema to their natural way of thinking. And I mean, he had Andreas Antonopoulos on a couple of times years ago. And Andreas, is a great guy. Yeah. He orange pilled. He's one of the most influential orange pilling Bitcoin people in the history of Bitcoin. I mean, if you go back, there's him, there's Trace Mayer, who was incredibly influential. He's kind of like pre-Michael Saylor. Everything Michael Saylor says about Bitcoin being an asset class, Trace Mayer said in 2010, he was buying Bitcoin at 10 cents. Then he kind of fell off the face of the earth. That's just, you have to go with what, like Donald Rumsfeld said, you go to war with the army you have. Another highlight in past year for me, got a chance to sit down with the president for 5 hours, talk Bitcoin mostly. And, there's some great shots of him with these grenades. And I think these grenades speak to the idea of a non-violent revolution that is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a revolution, but it's a revolution that doesn't require violence. And it has attributes from there. Yeah. I mean, that's the rabbit hole that is Bitcoin. The banks are getting very nervous. And the central banks are getting very nervous. The politicians in Washington, like Liz Warren, for example, and others, Chuck Schumer, they're starting to realize that this Bitcoin is very disruptive to the entire status quo, the entire system. And now they're trying to figure out how to fight back. They're 10 years too late. They're not going to succeed, but they will resort to everything. They'll stop at nothing and resort to anything to try to stop the Bitcoin revolution. And they could do a lot of really silly things and dumb things. And a lot of people could get hurt. As I've been saying now for 5 years, I think what you're going to see around the world is not governments banning Bitcoin, but governments getting involved in what I call the global hash war, the concept I introduced 5 years ago, where countries are going to be trying to compete with each other to mine and hoard Bitcoin. As the fiat money collapses, as banks collapse, there's really only two choices. That would be gold and Bitcoin. Bitcoin is superior in many, many ways. So I think that's how we get to Bitcoin 2 million. Up until Bitcoin, just about every single industry in imaginable had become essentially transformed by software. So supermarkets, they're actually software companies. Energy companies are software companies. Software companies are software companies. Everything is driven by data and maximizing data. Yield management on an airline, that's a software product. That's an algorithm. So all corporations defer to algorithms and software and computer technology. And so this is what drives the entire economy for all these industries. And that started in the 1970s and just advanced every year since then. The one lagging part of the economy that had yet to capitulate to software would be money. So money itself was still and banks were still a 300-year-old paradigm. And so Bitcoin comes around and it takes money into now a 300-year paradigm shift. So that's a huge shift. Bitcoin is very much in the tradition of alchemists. Instead of trying to turn lead into gold, you're turning digits or encryption into the most advanced form and what do we call perfect money. Yeah. Stacy often talks about Bitcoin as being Enlightenment 2.0, President Bukele as being the new Medici, and El Salvador is the new Florence. It's attracting all the talent. It's attracting all the commerce. It's attracting all the artists. And so far that hypothesis has been proven correct. Every single week, you read every week, there's a story. I always ask the question on Twitter, is Bitcoin causing the chaos, or is it reacting to the chaos, or is it causing the chaos? And I think the answer is both. Yeah. And we're in a very, very chaotic period, similar to other previous chaotic periods in history. And it's similar in ways, but it's also very different because Bitcoin is a very different situation. And it forces people to dig down into their own self and understand who they are. I think Bitcoin is a mirror. And if you're somebody like Sam Bankman-Fried, you look in the mirror of Bitcoin and you see a shyster, a kleptomaniac, a criminal, and you go and you lean into that. Yeah. And you became a bigger criminal than he would have been had Bitcoin not existed, because it revealed the inner criminality in his soul, and it forced him to act out and then be eviscerated by the presence of Bitcoin. If you're somebody like President Bukele, for example, you look at Bitcoin mirror and you say, you know what? This country, El Salvador, is actually, it's a $60 billion economy. It's a 10 to 20% growing economy. It's a tourist destination. It brought out what was already great, and it brought it out to now running with it, because it's the mirror. It's the magic mirror, Bitcoin. The US and these other countries in Europe, they're cracking under the pressure of fiat money madness. You know, fiat money breeds violence. Fiat money breeds war. Bitcoin monetizes peace and love. El Salvador is well positioned in the world today that's crumbling under the weight of fiat money insanity. Yeah. Well, a couple of things. So a lot of the early Bitcoiners, a lot of them went rogue, like a Roger Ver, for example, who forked off and created another altcoin. Craig. I won't say the whole name because he's kind of a litigious nightmare, but I think people know who I'm talking about. You know, they decided that they were bigger than Bitcoin, and Bitcoin susses out people who are egomaniacs versus the people who are more humble. You know, you have to be humble because Bitcoin, the volatility keeps you humble, right? We've had 6, I think, down moves of 80 or 90%. And to be able to get through those requires humility. You have to just like suck it up. Ethereum is garbage. And, you know, he was early and he's very vocal about saying these things. And that's all been proven to be correct. I think that El Salvador, has benefited by Bitcoin maximalism because they avoided entirely all the problems of the past year that's happened in all these coins blowing up. And now we see another wave of counterparty risk and all these counterparty banks blowing up, Silicon Valley Bank blowing up, because again, it's a magic mirror. You know, Silicon Valley, Andreessen Horowitz, those guys are not Bitcoiners. They're not Bitcoin maximalists. They're scammers. They're charlatans. And they looked at Bitcoin and they said, we can create something similar to Bitcoin and sell it to suckers and make a quick buck. And now their karmic wheel is crushing them, as it should be. And if they get destroyed and the banks go under and there's a huge crash and the economy blows up, so be it. You know, that's the way, if that's the way they want to play it, that's the way we want to play it. We got our private keys. We got our Bitcoin. We're sitting here. And if you guys want to blow everything up to smithereens, you want to start all over again from the Stone Age, you know, we're ready. Bitcoin is the master kind of revealer of the truth. It is the truth. It's the truth machine. I mean, this goes back 7 or 8 years, Michael. I think that The Economist magazine had a cover story that said Bitcoin, the truth machine. I mean, that was a very profound statement at that time. And I don't think hardly anybody understood what exactly the truth machine means. And now we know what it means. It means if you're a crooked bank like Silicon Valley Bank, you're going to get destroyed. You're going to get crushed under the wheel of Bitcoin. If you're a big fat loser like Karstens at the Bank of International Settlements, you're going to get destroyed by Bitcoin. No matter how much power you think you have, you don't have any power. The OG Bitcoin in me, of course, it goes back to a fundamental underlying hatred of banks and Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein and Goldman Sachs. And Bitcoin is really the bank killer. You know, it gets rid of these guys and I detest them, right? So a lot of times if you work on Wall Street and you see how things are done, you kind of, you know, turn into a whistleblower and you're like, wait a minute. Like I said, again, on this Tucker Carlson show, I mentioned that in the pension industry, it's a toxic waste dump for Wall Street. Wall Street wraps losing trades and busted trades and losses, and they package it up and they dump it in pension accounts for teachers and hospital workers and things like that. And it's incredibly cruel. I mean, Wall Street is a very cruel industry made up of craven, cruel people who are bankrupting anybody who's not on their speed dial list, who they are doing insider trading with. We see the results. The economy is crashing. The cities are collapsing. Stacy got an email from John Matonis who was the inventor. I think it's called Hushmail, which is an encrypted mail. Okay. And then he's gotten into, and he became the director of the Bitcoin Foundation. And he contacted Stacy and said he'd like to maybe come on the show. And Stacy said to me, this guy, John Matonis, he wants to talk about something called Bitcoin. And it sounds like your Hollywood dollar. It sounds like that Hollywood thing you were doing. So he came on. And so that was in 2011. But for me, I still like to do it because it's a way to fight against the bankers. And I like fighting against bankers because, you know, as I said, I was in the banking industry. And the thing about fighting the banking, like a Jamie Dimon, is that they never really hit back, which is different than, let's say, if you're doing a lot of protest against the energy industry, that's really dangerous. Or the defense industry, that's really dangerous. You know, environmental journalists who go after companies who are polluting, a lot of those journalists get disappeared. They get murdered, right? But when you go after big banks, they don't care. There's nothing that you can do to hurt them. They will always get a bailout anyway. Well, we had speculated for years about which country would make Bitcoin legal tender first. El Salvador's name didn't pop up. So then at Bitcoin conference in Miami, the announcement was made, Jack Mallers, and had basically had a relationship with President Bukele, and the announcement was made, they made Bitcoin legal tender. So immediately, like, we knew that we had to come here. So we came here in 2021 in November to see what was going on. And we are pretty well known. I mean, from the TV show, especially because the TV show is dubbed into Spanish and plays all over the Spanish-speaking world, in particular in Central America and South America. Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin was a great call. We got a lot of people into Bitcoin under $5, and but not so many in the United States, because the United States has a huge bias against anything that's not produced in the United States. So we met the president. We met him first at a groundbreaking for in downtown El Salvador. They're building a new library, et cetera. And he was incredibly cordial, and you could tell he was a humble guy who was loved by folks, but very, very smart and very aware of everything that's going on. I would say